What was the genesis of this book? There must be a really terrific story that pushed you into writing it.
There is a great story. A little over 3 years ago, I was invited by some friends to meet a friend of theirs who had just been told he had 3 months to live from stomach cancer. And the purpose of my meeting him was that he had done some writing and wanted some advice on how to get his things published before he died. The writing was in the form of memoirs and essays and things like that. I actually thought my role with this man was to be the one to impart the bad news, that his writing wasn't really that special, and that his life wasn't really that special, and that he should spend his last few months with his family. I met him, and I read his stuff, and I was wrong about just about everything. He was a fascinating, unique man, and his writing was magical. And over the next few months, I hooked him up with someone we both know well, Lawrence Shames, another mystery writer. And together, he and Larry put together a magical little book called Not Fade Away, which is based on Peter's life and death, and on these wonderful essays that he showed me the first week we met.
Was he writing that book for his children as much as anything?
It wasn't a book. This is a series. When he handed me this pile of paper, no two of them were on pieces of paper that were the same size. Some of them were on hotel stationery. I could tell that he'd written them when he'd been on business trips. Some of them were on lined yellow legal paper. Some of them were typed out. Some of them were handwritten. These were just essays that had no real continuity to them whatsoever, other than his unique view of living. And at that time, he had just started writing about his upcoming death, and there were some of those in it as well. But this was in no way a polished anything. And he and Larry spent quite a few months. Peter ended up living until September of that year, putting them all together, and Larry writing transitions and finding themes to tie them all together. And I'm singing to the choir because I know you think that the book is as lovely as I do, but they really did a fine, fine job with it. In April of that year, when Peter and Larry were working, I was sitting at Peter's house on his deck, and he was telling me a story about the death of a man his mother had been dating. Peter's own father had died when he was a young man. And this man was reputed to be a spy, CIA, something, and had died in mysterious circumstances in the Rockies. He'd gone over a cliff, hang gliding or ice climbing or something. And as Peter was telling the story of this guy's death, I thought he sounded wistful. And I asked him, I said, do you ever think about it on a good day? Peter was in a lot of pain by then. And I said, on a good day, do you think about getting in a car and going up into the mountains and just going over a cliff, ending it? And Peter immediately acknowledged the fantasy. And then he said, I couldn't do it. My kids would wonder. Peter was always determined that his death be as much a model for his children as his life had been. And I dropped it, and that was the last time Peter and I ever talked about it. On the way home from his house that day, I had one of those what-if moments that I treasure as a novelist. And the what-if was, what if there were a way for someone like Peter, Peter was a wealthy, successful man, to arrange to have his life end in such a way that his kids wouldn't wonder.
You mean that it would look like genuine accident?
That his wife wouldn't even know, that he just checked out. A little farther down the road, I thought, well, what if there were a company that you could sign up for, like an insurance policy, that if you ever became disabled to a certain degree or physically ill to a certain degree, they would step in and end your life in a completely anonymous fashion. And by the time I got home, I knew I had the genesis of a book. I didn't know what any of the characters were going to look like. I didn't know what the story would look like. But this whole idea of a business that you could hire to kill you, should your life ever reach a certain level of disability or illness, just seemed like a wonderfully provocative idea for a story.
And don't you think that is actually one of the really critical issues that all of us at some point in our life have to think about? Modern medicine is a mitzvah and a real curse. And I think any of us can think, what if I had a stroke? What if I have lost an uncle to a particularly hideous kind of cancer. I had a grandfather who spent the end years of his life asking everyone who came to see him to kill him because his life was just a purgatory, but medicine wouldn't end it for him. And he had lost, the thing that was tragic was that while he was okay, he wanted to live. And by the time he didn't want to live, he'd moved into a position where he couldn't end his own life because now he's trapped in, you know, hospital care or hospice care in whatever. And I think we all have to think about that today.
I've not met literally anyone who has not been part of some conversation discussing an injured coworker or an ill loved one or, you know, a friend who's just had a car accident or a stroke, where someone hearing the terrible details of that person's condition doesn't say, if that ever happens to me, I wish somebody would kill me. I think it's a universal, the fear of being forced to live.
Exactly. On life support or
in a way we don't want.
Right.
Whatever that way might be. And the issues I had to deal with in writing this is what a movable line that is. You know, what is that line? When you're 40 and vibrant and healthy, where is that line of, I don't want to live if this happens? And is it different than if you're 70 and frail? It gave me a tremendous amount to think about as I was writing. It also provides a tremendous dramatic basis for a narrative. So it was, I consider it a great gift that the inspiration. Didn't this whole
Terry Scavo thing go on while you were working on this, or before?
It was in the background, and Terry Schiavo, like the Jean Bonnet thing, didn't interest me.
Right.
It was a tragedy of our creation. I mean, you know, in many ways, it was the intervention that created the tragedy. I was much more interested in the vibrancy and the loss of vibrancy. And by the time we met Terry Schiavo, that was historically already an artifact.
Right, but the central debate there again was, would she have chosen?
Right.
And it's the question you're asking in this book, essentially, you know, would she have chosen, right, you know, to let someone kill her rather than go on that way? It's the Clint Eastwood movie with, what's the name of that movie?
$1 Million Baby.
Thank you. It's the thing in $1 Million Baby where he, you know, I think at some awful point she tries to bite her tongue through to end it all. And again, she's in the hospital, you know, they rescue her, and then he has to make this decision based on what he knew about her, of whether to help her go. It's the Kevorkian thing, it's the whole bit. And so your idea that somebody could hire essentially a company that would come in and without your knowing when, which is I think the critical part.
The other critical part that makes the dramatic narrative so powerful is that you have to sign up when you're healthy and you can't back out once you're sick. So people have to make the big decision, draw the line in the sand at a time when they're young and supposedly objective about what kind of life they want to live, but does not allow them to reconsider that once tragedy has struck. And, you know, I think if the rules were different, the narrative would be different, and certainly the power of the story would be different.
Well, I think that's true, and actually it's an interesting way to introduce a ticking talk device. Let me try it again.
I know what you're saying.
Well, maybe the listeners don't. A ticking clock device into a thriller, because would not the big challenge of this whole story be to turn it into a thriller that would be suspenseful and interesting?
I knew I had a great story. I wasn't sure how to turn it into a thriller at first. And I also knew, as the story coalesced in my head, that I couldn't tell it in any fashion that approached chronological.